Last one, Heifetz or Oyster.
Welcome to another episode of the Whole Note Podcast. My name is Shin-Yang Kim, and today we will be joined by violinist Timothy Chooi. Timothy has garnered international recognition, having won first prize at the Joachim International Violin Competition and second prize at the Queen Elizabeth International Violin Competition. He has traveled the world performing with orchestras both here in the States and abroad, and has performed with renowned luminaries such as Lang Lang, Pinchas Zuckerman, James Ehnes, and much more. We sat down as Timothy shared with us his work with the great Catherine Cho at the Juilliard School, his work as professor of violin at the University of Ottawa, and much more. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and would like insight into the lives of other great artists, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We hope you enjoy. Thanks.
All right, Timmy, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I'm so honored, and it's a pleasure to be here with you in your parents' home here, or at least the community room of your parents' building here in Philadelphia. And I know it's really apt that we're here because I want to talk to you first about your family a little bit. And I want to talk to you about your older brother, Nicky, who is in his own right is an internationally acclaimed violinist and currently serving as concertmaster of the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra. I want to talk to you, how has having had an older brother who's gone down a very similar narrow path, such as yourself, benefited you both personally and professionally?
That's a really great question. So it's, first of all, really nice to have someone else in the family that understands and have gone through this entire path of becoming a professional classical musician. It's such a unique and niche way of approaching life, I think, because it's much more than just professional. It also affects you personally. And of course, your entire world changes completely as you get into this field. With my brother, he started much before me. He's 5 years older than I am. And he kind of carved the entire trail for me in some ways. And I'm so blessed. And it took me a while to understand how blessed I was to be in that situation, because every single step going forwards, I could see from a bird's eye view of, is this the right step? Is there value to a certain, going to school earlier or later? Or what is the value of doing something now rather than later, or doing it later, for example? And just really understanding the world of classical music and all of the things that are peculiar to this field. For me, that really helped me with not only how I developed musically, but also professionally, and having a healthy relationship with my instrument. Between me and my brother, we're very close, and I think part of that is because of our instrument connection as well. It's not very often that you have two siblings coming from a non-musical family playing at a very professional level and going to the same schools and also having done the same competitions. So with that in mind, what has created on top of just being siblings is that we're able to relate on so many things beyond, who are you dating, or who our friends are, what school you went, who bullied you, but also just kind of like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna go play at Carnegie Hall, and just like I'm kind of nervous. He's, oh, I've been there. Don't worry about it. Like it's just like any other concert, for example. So it's really nice to have someone that I can truly trust beyond that one time. And also we play together a lot, and that's very special because oftentimes when you play chamber music, which is an absolutely incredible form of music making, it can feel a little bit transactionary because you're playing together, you're very intense together for 5 days or 3 days. You play the concert and you all go back into your separate lives. Whereas me and my brother, even if we finish that concert, we continue onwards for the next concert, and then we're going to see each other in a couple weeks. So having a brother that is a professional musician, especially a violinist, has really opened up my world.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious, was your brother the inspiration for you starting the violin? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So by the time I was born, my brother was practicing a couple hours a day already. So I've heard that as babies, there are several ways to approach that. Either you end up hating the instrument, or you end up doing exactly the same thing you want to do. I did the exact same thing. I think you also did, right? A little bit?
Well, and no, I wanted to ask this question because to a much smaller scale, my brother was a violinist through high school, a pretty solid violinist for that time. But even though we played different instruments, we auditioned for the same youth orchestra, same competitions and auditions. And so I remember I would ask him for advice on things, and I'm sure for you, you did the same for schools and competitions, bigger competitions, obviously. So I'm sure just having that resource on such a personal level has helped you tremendously.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think on top of just my brother, my parents also learned and grew with having the experience through my brother being the firstborn child. And to me, being 5 years younger, it was a sizable amount of time that my parents could think about how to approach this entire field.
Right.
And they're so supportive to this day. It's incredible. But my brother, I would say he actually became more of a mentor maybe around college age. So I think that's when we all start to form our own personalities in a way that we're willing to show it. So around 17, 18 for my brother was when he started to really help, like, just do this, you don't need to do that, or don't think too much about this. And I was 11 or 12 at the time. So I think a lot of it was my brother helping me how to approach everything.
Yeah. Well, and then you shared before the recording that you guys overlapped at Curtis for a couple years. And so when you first got there, that must have been really nice to have someone there that you already knew and trusted, obviously. Was he kind of like the protective older brother when you were there?
It was great. So I auditioned for Curtis because actually, I love the music, and I really wanted, I knew how prestigious the school was and all that. But to be honest, I didn't really know what it meant to go to Curtis. I wanted to go there because my brother and I we were just starting this bond together. He was starting to mentor me, and he would come back, and I realized how much I missed him. So I was like, I don't want to be alone here on Vancouver Island. So I decided, I told my parents, like, I heard some kids could get in earlier. And I've always had a very kind of driven personality, which has evolved during COVID especially. But I was like, I'm going to do it. If I can do it, then I'll do it. I'll do it. And I auditioned for Curtis when I was 15. And since then, I got accepted. So I was like, okay, I guess this is going to be a huge life change. My parents were like, oh, okay, that's a good sign. But also, like, what do we do? So we went to Curtis together, and I was in my very, very first year. I was still in I was still a junior at the time in high school. And my brother, I think he was very protective as the older brother. He kind of could see, being a 15, 16-year-old in a big city of Philadelphia, coming from very, safe and peaceful Vancouver Island. So many things could have gone wrong. So he was very protective, never overbearing, but very protective and always checking up on me. And to this day, honestly, still a little bit.
Awesome. That's so sweet. Well, and then I'm sure, because you guys, like I mentioned before, you guys did a lot of the same competitions. And we'll talk about your Queen Elizabeth experience, but I'm sure that was also a big help, kind of seeing him having gone through that, through the whole thing. So that's really wonderful. So moving forward a little bit, after Curtis, you went and studied at Juilliard with the great pedagogue Catherine Chooi, who is actually, I believe, one of the great violin pedagogues today. Can you talk a little bit about your work with her and just what kind of musical imprints she left in your life?
Absolutely. I have a very unique relationship with Miss Chooi, I call her. She was someone that I didn't really know much about, to be honest, before I entered Juilliard. But I've only heard great things. But I'm also very careful with how people portray everybody. Just something I learned. But I mean, there's something about the energy of our first meeting that I just said that whether or not it's going to be a great fit or not, I knew that it was something that I wanted to try. And we met here in Philadelphia, actually. So I had reached out to her a couple months before the audition, just a very cold email, just like kind of how you did, right? To me, I love cold emails. I actually think cold emails are better than, it's amazing what you can get. So I sent her a cold email just saying that, hello, my name is Timmy, and I'm really interested in auditioning for your studio. Can I get a trial lesson? And I remember she told me, meet me in Philadelphia. I'm going to be in Philadelphia. I'm like, I'm in Philadelphia. And she was playing with the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society. I still remember December of 2016. And we had a great lesson. And I just said that, you know what, I'm going to go for this. Because it was so different than my upbringing of learning the violin and musical experience previously. And I'm really happy that I did that, because it has been probably one of the most special relationships I've had with a mentor, in both a personal way, professionally, and also it was the time I think is very reflective of what happened. It's also when my performing career really just exploded.
Yeah.
And I'm not one to kind of separate things from each other, but I think the entire environment that I was in allowed me to prosper.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And talk to us a little bit about your lessons. Like, what were they like in terms of, was she very abstract with the way she described music, or was it more like just kind of hands-on? Like, was it?
It's amazing. I mean, her lessons, every lesson was different.
Sure.
That's the part that I'm still going to question her to this day. How does every lesson feel like it's a different page in the book of Timmy? But also, at the same time, it's still the same novel.
Right.
That was amazing. Yeah. The first lesson I had, I remember I played Izai number 3, Sonata number 3 for her. And I was a little bit nervous because, we only met very, very shortly. But I remember even that first lesson, immediately afterwards, I suddenly understood what I was doing much more clearly. Eventually, our lessons, what she really taught me at the very beginning, and it's changed over the 4 years and 5 years I studied with her, but the very first couple lessons, I would say if there's one thing that I understood what to do was how to practice.
Yeah.
Which is strange because I've been doing it at the time by, already 20 years.
Yeah.
But it was the first time I actually understood how to practice. Yeah. And practicing doesn't always mean just playing and repeating.
Yeah, of course.
And I think ever since then, I became much more efficient in my practice skills and knowing when to push and when not to push.
Yeah.
Eventually, as my studies with her grew, it was starting to become more deliberate with choices that were musical, but also how that reflects from my personal experience. Sure. So it was very intertwined. It was very psychological in a good way, of course. And there was just so much positivity, optimism, tough, of course, high expectations, but at the same time, just really allowed me to allow myself to inject my own musicality into my violin playing. And really just, I was so looking forward to every single lesson. Yeah. And I think after that, I've come to realize that is probably one of the most important things as you get older, is to kind of rediscover your relationship with your instrument. Because it's a long-term relationship, it's longer than most marriages. Exactly. It's now been almost 30 years of playing this instrument. Yeah. So, and with anything, you need to rediscover what you love about it.
Right. That's wonderful. And I'm sure the figuring out to be more efficient has served you well, especially given your current concert schedule where you're maybe not afforded the time to practice as much as you would like as you were when you were a student. Can you talk a little bit about your days as an artist diploma student specifically and what that entailed and what your life looked like at that point?
So artist diploma student for me, it was September 2019. So it was a couple months before COVID, actually. So quite honestly, I didn't really have much that I experienced out of the artist diploma program. It was, the program itself at Juilliard was very performance-based. So a huge emphasis on doing your professional opportunities. It was a fantastic support group behind me. If I needed to borrow a room, if I needed help with writing a project or reaching out to this one person, Juilliard was always there for me. And I think that is something that I'm so grateful for. I would say that my lessons were still at the core of the reasons why I continued to do that program. Of course. I learned Beethoven Violin Concerto in its entirety for the first time, which is a massive project. After that, it was very interesting because then COVID happened in March of 2020. And I was gone a lot before that because I already did the competitions and my performing career was going in full swing. So what happened after that was, I was still enrolled at Juilliard, but everything became online. And to this day, as now someone that does teach, it's amazing to see how quick the mentor has to change their strategy of running a studio. We were suddenly faced with this situation that we couldn't even understand. And for some reason, it still felt like we were glued together. My artist diploma program was very it was combined with a very specific project, which was learning Beethoven Concerto. And then suddenly dealing like, oh my gosh, the whole world is stopping right now. What am I doing with my life?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and that's so funny. And it was during your time as an AD student, I believe, which is when you won second prize at the Queen Elizabeth
I was
competition.
my second year master's, actually.
Second. Okay, so
Yeah.
you were, regardless, you were at Juilliard.
I was at Juilliard. Yeah.
So you were awarded second prize at the 2019 Queen Elizabeth competition, and on a previous episode with Will Hagen, he walked us through his experience at the 2015 competition where he was a third prize winner. Can you talk with us a little bit about that whole experience from the moment you decided to apply and compete to the entirety of all 3 rounds and going through the Chapelle and everything?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was a very deliberate decision to do Queen Elizabeth because I had just done the Hanover competition literally a month before the deadline.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was end of October 2018.
Okay.
And the deadline was, I think, December 1st of that same year.
For Queen Elizabeth.
For Queen Elizabeth,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, you had to record everything beforehand.
Right.
It was very deliberate. I remember I had a conversation with my teacher, Ms. Cho, at the time. Yeah. And I remember even the hesitation between her and me. I'm like, should I do this competition? I mean, it worked out that I won first prize for Hanover. So, and that came with a whole bunch of great things that were happening. And she's like, do you really want to put yourself in this situation again? I mean, not about doing the competition. It's like, do you want to just be more free and kind of just go with it and see where things bring you? Yeah. But there was part of me that always wanted to take part in this competition. And if there was a competition that I was willing to kind of, not succeed in, it would be this one, right? So I think it was very quick the way I made this decision. I think it was really like within 30 seconds. It was either yes or no. And I told myself, I'm going to put myself up in this situation where I just did Hanover, but I've always wanted to do Queen Elizabeth because I know I will not do it in 4 years. Yeah, it won't be the right point in my trajectory. Right. So I applied for the competition, and that was very deliberate. Right. And I was already starting to do a lot of tours at that time because Hanover and everything was going. And luckily, the repertoire for Queen Elizabeth was. It was tough, but it wasn't anything insane. I would say Hanover was pretty insane, actually. Yeah, that was pretty insane. That pushed me because it was so much repertoire and things I'd never played before. Right. With Queen Elizabeth, it was very, very specific, and there were a couple compulsory pieces that I had to prepare. But overall, it was pretty straightforward. Okay. And I remember when I was getting ready for it, I told myself, and I through the advice of my brother and also just my own experience, not to stretch yourself too thin with new repertoire. So I played Tchaikovsky again. I played a sonata that I've been playing over the past year. So very, very conservative with my repertoire because I knew that there was going to be compulsory pieces that's already going to throw me off. We got the compulsory piece I think 2 months before the competition happened, which is for the semifinal round. It's just a 5-minute piece. It was, oh my God, it was really tough. It was a modern piece. It was a modern piece. Everything was in 5/4, 7/4, 11/4. It was hard, and rhythm has been rhythm's not my. Let's put it that way. I'm a very lyrical player, so I love a little bit like a singer. A lot of freedom. So when a piece like that, I had migraines to talk all night about. So I did that, and I really enjoyed learning it because it pushed me to my next level. So I was so glad that I chose repertoire that I was so familiar with on top of that. So then finally, it was the end of April. And competition started first week of May. I remember I booked my flight and all of that, and part of the Hanover competition had me play in Poland the week before. Oh, wow. So I actually skipped the drawing part. I wasn't there for the draw. But on the rules, you're allowed to miss that first draw, but you have to be there as soon as possible. Right. So I was there immediately, and then I just remember it was, I was really just happy to do that competition, and I didn't think too much about it. And maybe ignorance is bliss. I came there with kind of this very naive, gullible. Everything's great. Everything's so pearly. Everything is fantastic. I'm excited to play. I'm excited to meet people. Right. I'm excited to live in Brussels for. It ended up being almost 3 months, but I was worried about my visa.
After the competition,
I stayed there for a good amount of time. Actually, I almost was like I should just get an apartment here, but my host family was amazing. But at first, even if you didn't pass the first round, you would be there for about 2 weeks. And then if you did, maybe 2.5, and then if you did the finals, it'd be at least a month. And then
Right.
even if you won a prize, you would stay another 2 weeks after that.
Yeah.
So, and then after you win the top 3 prizes,
Right.
you do even more tours. So
Right.
I was just so excited to open that chapter of my life
Yeah.
in Europe.
Yeah.
And the world of violin playing was
Yeah.
so interesting to me, and everything just aligned. So my entire experience at Queen Elizabeth, if I can say, it was very grandioso. It was very grand. Everything was celebratory.
Yeah.
It was very different than Hanover competition.
Yeah.
Hanover was much more, it felt like a competition.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of tension.
Yeah.
Queen Elizabeth seemed just like everybody's just part of the Olympics or something.
Yeah.
It felt like a ceremony.
Celebratory.
Celebratory.
Festival.
The Queen was there. The juries looked amazing.
Yeah.
The hall was completely packed.
Yeah.
Everything was recorded.
Yeah.
From backstage,
Yeah.
you were on the Dutch
Yeah.
or the Flemish radio station,
Right,
but also
right.
in the Netherlands, they did some things there.
Sure.
The French part of Belgium also did interviews. It was literally, it felt so international.
Yeah.
And people were writing to me from Philadelphia,
Yeah.
from Canada, from all over. I was just like, I'm watching you play right now. This is so cool.
Yeah.
So it was, and then the Chapelle experience was also very unique. So we had to stay in this chapel for 7 days, where they took away our phones, our computers, and all that, and we're given a brand new piece, a concerto of 25 minutes to learn in 7 days and to perform it.
Right.
And I love that. It was one of the. I look back, and I just realized how much 7 days can actually unfold as.
Yeah.
If it's a choice.
And if you don't have distractions, right?
Exactly. Yeah, no distractions, and you realize how much time you waste. Because I remember I practiced for 2 hours. I'm like, I'm exhausted, and I actually learned half the piece.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes, especially during COVID time, I was practicing for 2 hours, and I could barely get through the first line.
Right.
And of course, that was a whole different world too.
Yeah.
So my experience at Queen Elizabeth was overall extremely revolutionary in terms of understanding more about myself.
Right.
Understanding how music plays a role in the public, and to see how excited people were about classical music if it's framed in a way that it showed its value.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because Will shared with us too his joy for that competition. And it's funny your admiration for that competition in particular, because I think a lot of people would argue, more than any other competition, Queen Elizabeth is probably the top violin competition.
I think so.
Yeah. And Will was sharing that it was so different from other competitions because every round felt like a performance where, like you said, the halls were packed. People were really just there to enjoy music. It didn't feel like a typical competition in that sense.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, unlike other competitions, this was a month-long endeavor, which is different from other competitions where it's maybe 2 weeks at most.
Yes.
So the fact that you went through that whole undertaking and just, I'm sure you were exhausted, but in such a fulfilled way by the end of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier on, I'm a pretty driven person, at least before COVID. So for me, the fact of just doing nothing and being stagnant was very irritating. So the fact that I had, this thirst for adrenaline, I think actually kept me sane. It's changed now for the better, I think. But it was a long festival. But also the thing is that it's a choice to do this competition because you do realize. I mean, in hindsight, I look back, but at the time, I also made the decision like you have to actually block out a month of your life schedule, whatever. If you have, let's say you're touring already, you literally have to say no. And I did say no to a couple, quite some things that I knew that I might not even make it past the first round. And I'm saying no to an engagement, or just literally making that room, and not everybody can do that. So I was, it was something that I was a little bit of a gamble for sure, because you're like, if you don't pass the first round, you're kind of doing nothing. But if you do, then you're going to be filled with that experience. So I had a little experience of just blocking on that 1 month. It really did feel like a festival.
Well, and just from the videos I've seen of that competition, it really feels like a sporting event, like more than anything else. Like the way that the U.S. would, portray like a football game is, I feel like how they portrayed the Queen Elizabeth competition. And my favorite thing to watch actually is they have the videos of the award ceremony where they announce a winner. They come out, take a bow, shake all the judges' hands, but then right afterwards, the reporters come and like just crowd you and just ask you all these questions, and it makes you feel like a celebrity, I'm sure. So,
it does. It did for sure. It really felt like the Olympics. A country played a big role. I think also I started to understand the fundamentals of where I grew up a little bit better after that, because it was so interesting to see which countries supported me, or at least felt like they owned me.
Yeah.
Definitely Canada did,
yeah.
and the US as well, because
Right.
I feel like I mean, I'm both, but it really did feel like that, because the proclamation of the ceremony
Yeah.
was intense. It was, I mean, I would never trade that experience again, but it was intense because we would go into this room, there would be press, someone had a question for us,
Right.
and then we would kind of just wait in the backstage. There's a lot of waiting, and then they would announce, and then after that, everybody had to go into their own little situation. We met the queen, the king, you know, the princess, the princesses,
Right.
dinners, gala events, donors, you name it. Like it went on till like 1 a.m. every single night. It was great, but it was intense. It really did feel like I did feel like an athlete for the first time. And I'm retired for that.
So moving forward a little bit, and now I want to talk a little bit about a different hat that you put on in the musical world. You currently serve as the professor of violin at the University of Ottawa, a position that you were appointed at the age of 27, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's astounding. So can you talk a little bit about your teaching philosophy and what all that entails, but also can you share with us a little bit about how your teaching endeavors have come to complement your work as a performer, and vice versa?
Okay. So I was granted that position in 2021, and it was such a huge honor to get that email from the department saying that we would love for you to take on this role as assistant professor of violin at the University of Ottawa. First of all, it was a huge turn, I would say, in my trajectory, both personally and professionally. So first of all, I grew up in Canada. I'm from Canada, and it's always a very, very supportive country. As we were talking earlier over lunch, they've always had me come back to play with all the orchestras, and I really did feel like I was a part of this Canadian musical journey. But at the same time, my entire life had moved to America. I'm an American citizen. My family moved here. My brother works here. I went to Juilliard in Philly. All my friends were here. So literally, the idea of moving back to Canada was not impossible by any means, but it was not on the radar. It was not on the radar at all. And at the same time, it was during COVID, and I think for all of us, especially for me at least, I was thinking about, okay, what's the next step? I have this incredible opportunity, these experiences, the skills, this intensity of learning through many, many different mentors that I will continue to learn for decades to go forwards with. But what is my value to society? And teaching and becoming a professor, which was a whole different thing. I had to understand what that meant, because being a professor doesn't always mean you're teaching, right? It's just one of the roles that you have to take upon. But for me, because coming from the conservatory mindset, being a professor was interchangeable with teaching. But I didn't realize that until much later, because performing is also part of being a professor. Research as well. So my philosophy for the teaching part of my professorship, I think, has developed over the past 3 years that I've been there already. First of all, when I first came there, I wanted to share all of my experiences. I wanted every student to be inspired by the possibilities of where the world will take them. And that has continued to stay to this point, because I do feel like everybody at, I came from a small town, you came from a small town. I think anything is possible, at least in North America. And I want every student to have that optimism that if they really want to do something, as long as they're smart, creative, and are able to put in the work, that they can achieve to great heights. May not be, exactly what they want, but they can, go somewhere very far. But at the same time, I realize how much of a sponge they are at this age, and you got to be careful what kind of dreams you give to them. And I think that I've realized that because in some ways I was already so immersed in the classical music world
Yeah.
that many things came to me as fundamental.
Yeah.
The idea of practicing was fundamental.
Right.
The idea of going to a master class was so ingrained in my body. I was like, if I can, I'll go there.
Of course.
Going to concerts for me,
Yeah.
not only was it just an enjoyable experience, but I was there to observe,
Yeah.
there to meet people, there to learn about the piece itself. And I realized a lot of students don't know that. So for me, I had to actually step a lot backwards. Not one, but maybe like 10 steps back.
Yeah.
And actually share that kind of idea with the students, because I was taking it for granted that they knew all about this. And I was a little bit in an ivory tower, I would say. It's just being like, this is fundamental knowledge. But then I was at Curtis, I was at Juilliard, I was in Europe. And and also within those contexts, I was, at a very different point of learning. And I had a crisis, I would say, after my second semester teaching there, because I didn't know what I was teaching anymore. Because, playing wise, it's such a slow growth for anybody. And not everybody had the luxury of having a dedicated teacher from age 3 onwards, or even just family understanding how to build skills on a very consistent basis. So I realized that I had to angle this in a different way. My teaching philosophy is definitely, I think with music, especially, everybody has a different relationship with it. And I've come to realize that if you choose to do a degree in music, you better have a reason that you're doing it, And I would say most students do. I would say a majority of them do have a reason. None of them are doing it off the fly, because it's not exactly a degree that you would just say like, oh, I just feel like trying out to be a violinist. It takes years of a very personal relationship with this instrument. So for me, I think part of my job as someone that has experienced the international stage is to build students, musicians, of people that will continue to do that into the future. And suddenly I felt this responsibility to nurture this love of music, this love of classical music, especially the violin and specifically. But also, I think that, this world is, it wouldn't be as colorful without art and music and violin specifically. And even though it's so abstract and people don't understand it, the majority of normal people don't understand it. I think the fact that you're willing to put your hours and your life onto a very abstract thing that is so incredibly human innovation, I think there is an awe to the fantasy of playing violin that keeps people's spirit alive. And the fact that they can bring that out, whether it's from a retirement home concert to on stage at a big Carnegie Hall or something, I think that is part of the allure of being a musician. And whether or not they take that into their professional careers, I think it doesn't really matter, as long as you're very clear about that from the beginning. But I think that it really can help someone continue to wake up and look forward to something that is so unexplainable to how it affects our daily lives and why we want to keep doing things. Because, whether it's violin, whether it's cooking, whether it's drawing, whether it's watching a movie, it's all art form that we live and work to enjoy.
It's interesting. And so, just talking more about your work, what does your studio in Ottawa look like? Is it a lot of undergrads, or is it some mix of grads?
It's changed over the years. When I first started, it was very mixed. I had probably, it was a big studio. I'm actually looking back sometimes, and I'm actually pretty, I pat myself on the back because I was handed off a studio from my predecessor. And that was a large studio of 26 students.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't teach everybody, but I did see everybody at some point. So there was a good chunk, maybe like 12 or 13 undergrad students, but crossover first and fourth year. There was a good chunk of master's students and graduate diploma. And it was so strange because at 27 at the time, I had a few students that were older than me doing their diploma. And
would they call you Professor Chewy, or?
Yeah, they did.
Were you pretty? How was that dynamic?
It was strange. It was strange, and I'm so I think I have a very special relationship with those. I still keep in contact with those students, but it was a very strange time because I didn't really know what to say to them. And just coming a little bit from my Asian background, age difference is very clear with hierarchy.
Of course.
So I was like, is it rude if I tell you what's wrong? I don't know. But I've learned to understand how to coax that a little bit better. I still have a few students that are older than me. but I understand a little bit better of how to approach those. What was actually very difficult was the students that were a little bit younger than me.
Okay.
Around 24, 25.
Sure.
I think because the older students kind of were just laughing about it. They're like, okay, it's going to be fun, right? Whatever.
Yeah.
It was a little bit younger, 23, 24, 25.
Yeah.
I think it's because they're at a phase where they're really wanting to understand what they're doing with music.
Yeah.
And having a new professor that's 27
Yeah.
and kind of winging it a little bit still. Trying my best, of course, but winging it. And during a time of COVID was very strange.
Yeah.
And I think, it was, I learned a lot after that first year.
Wait, so did you come in having to teach over Zoom still, or how was?
It was a mixture.
Okay.
Some of my students were, I had many international students,
Sure.
and because of the quarantine stuff, many of them decided to stay in their native countries.
Sure.
So it was a combination of everything. But man, that first year really taught me how difficult it could be. Because after that first year, I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. But it's only gotten easier over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
I'm still learning a lot.
Yeah.
My studio now is a full studio. I have the entire violin. I'm the only professor there at the university.
Okay.
So we have a studio of about 20 students, but
Okay.
I don't see all of them every week.
Okay.
I share with some of my assistants and my adjuncts.
Okay.
But it's a full studio, and studio class is always fun. Everybody's very excited to see each other.
Yeah.
So it's a full experience.
Yeah. Well, and you shared with me, excuse me, before how you are there for the full 12-week semester, which is so admirable considering your performance schedule.
Yeah.
So it's obvious that you're very dedicated to your teaching endeavor. So talking a little bit more about your teaching, I'm curious, when you are done teaching and then let's say after a full day of teaching, you go back to practicing, do you have times where you're practicing and you're like, oh yeah, I told someone else to do something like this, so I should, I don't know, do you have that kind of like...
Definitely. I wouldn't say that happens a lot, but I would say what actually happens the most is chugging through to practice. Not taking time for advantage. So as I mentioned, when I studied with Miss Cho, she learned me how to practice better.
Yeah.
Once I started teaching, I learned how to practice even better. I've actually I unlearned some bad habits. I would say that especially after the competition, because it was such an intense period of performing live, you would have to bring up a concerto like this, right? Yeah. And I could do it. Yeah. And I probably could still do it, but it's not enjoyable. You feel like you have to kill your entire day, literally murder that entire day, or 3 days, and not see the sun. And then you would be on stage kind of still nervous and anxious about if you can get through the whole piece. Yeah. And usually it'd be fine. Yeah. But I've learned a little bit of consistency every single day is much more valuable than bulking it 3 days before. Yeah. Or even a day before. So, sometimes I wouldn't even touch the concerto because of travel schedules. And suddenly I had 6 hours in the morning and I would just practice. And what that does is it really affects your relationship with the instrument as well. There was a point, I think, around 2020 when I really felt like I needed a lot of time off from the instrument, but I couldn't at the same time because everything kind of rolled. Right. COVID was very timely, actually, but I wouldn't say it was exactly the nicest time off. It was very stressful as well. But especially in my second year of teaching, I remember I told a student, I just say, even if you're really busy with all your classes, literally just touch the most difficult section of that entire piece and just practice for half an hour. And for me, that just suddenly unfolded my entire life because I sometimes only have 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And it's so easy to just go on your phone and start scrolling. But what I forced myself to do is you know what? I told my students to do that. I have to kind of live up to my words. And I would just literally pick up one section of Beethoven's Concerto, the cadenza, for example, and I'd say, okay, just work on this one line. Which cadenza do you play? I play the Chrysler cadenza, but there's a one line where I could never just play it, and I would just spend 15 minutes on it. My brain would be wired by then. So that kind of habitual practicing that I think my previous teachers and even my parents kind of just instilled in me or was a little bit more helicopter disappeared during when I graduated and I started performing. And it's almost now that I have to discipline myself. So the idea of discipline has really come up since teaching. Being more organized. I'm still working on it because it's, I think we're all working on it. But being more organized and not just practicing, but also taking advantage of starting things earlier.
Right.
And even though if you're not able to bring it to a level of where it can be performed yet, just to start. The hardest thing is just start.
Yeah, that's interesting. And are there times where you perform and you're like, okay, I need to like focus on this with my student? Like, there's this one passage that I just really need to make sure that they get it like right or something. Or are there times like that where
always, especially as the semester gets later in. And you know, so much of teaching has allowed me to understand and reflect back on what it was like for me as a student. So I remember September is always great. October is still great. November, it's like, oh man, everything I set out to do in September didn't really work. December's bad. December is like, but at least it's like, okay, Christmas is coming, holidays are coming, I can restart my life. And then January comes and you just feel so zoned out. February, you're dead. March, okay, the semester's gonna end, so you start. So I always now am much more aware of the cycle of the year, and it's not even just about me, but I think it's a human thing. We tend to be the most productive in certain times of the year, and how to best play with that so that students don't feel like they're wasting their time, because it's so easy for students to get frustrated and flustered.
That's wonderful. And so moving forward a little bit, so I love watching you perform on YouTube from your YouTube videos, because I think you have such a beautiful musical intuition just naturally for the music you perform. I'm curious, was this intuition innate? Like, do you think you've always just kind of had it naturally, or is it something you think it developed more with your studies and growing as a person?
I think that the intuition, well, thank you, first of all. I'm trying to think about how I developed my passion for music. It definitely was not something that I would say came naturally. I've learned to be passionate about music. I think when I was very young, it was very obvious. So I think you got to start with some sort of passion at a young age. I would say it plateaued around, it came in waves. So it plateaued in my childhood, and then it came back when I started at Curtis, and it built up. It plateaued again during COVID, actually. I would say it just kind of plateaued. But I think that's normal. I think the intuition of performing has always been very natural to me. I do love the idea of sharing something with people, whether that be talking about something, whether that be performing or serving food or you know, having someone over. I like the idea of hosting. So for me, I find great joy in having people have a great experience of the present. But I would say I learn a lot from watching other people play. And I know this can be controversial, but I think there is value to the saying, steal like an artist. Because that's the beautiful thing about art. You can't really copyright someone else's way of playing. No matter how much you try to imitate it, you cannot exactly imitate it. Same thing with acting, I think. So there are a couple of people that I just really look up to, and I would study. I remember before I went to Curtis, my teacher situation in my hometown was a little bit dicey, because I didn't really have one full-time teacher. But that was the time when YouTube came out, 2006, 2007. And I remember suddenly all these incredible videos were coming out. Pinchas Zuckerman, Itzhak Perlman, Heifetz, all of these people that you only could hear on video, on CD, where suddenly you could see how they played, right? So I would rip it off the internet, slow it down, and just literally rewind and rewind and rewind and rewind. And I'm like, why does that person, when you do upper staccato, do that? How come their vibrato is so loose? So there's a sense of self-research that I think that's very necessary in order to learn for a passion. Because I think once you can clearly find a technique for it, then you can start explaining that as well. And that's also when the passion starts, because you start realizing I'm really good at this, or at least I have enough resistance that I'm willing to go through the pain and suffering of trying to learn and actually finding a solution and explaining it. So that's with everything. I mean, with music playing, that's the thing about it. It's so multifaceted. It's not just about playing the piece. It's like, how do you perform on stage? How do you break down your mentality and prepare for a concert? How do you learn a piece? How do you teach someone? How do you think about a new program? And you know, it's so multifaceted that I think that's how I developed the passion for it.
Well, and that's really interesting, because you talked about like kind of stealing, you know, ideas. And you know, it's interesting because I think regardless of how much you try to imitate someone else, one's performance is like their own fingerprint, right?
Yep.
It's like whatever you offer, regardless of how much you're trying to imitate someone else, it's just unique to you because you're bringing not just your music, but your whole life experience and everything that you have to offer as a person to you on stage. So again, you can't 100% copy any one person, no matter how much you would like to. And I think we talked before. It's like we kind of grew up at like a very sweet spot in middle school, where that's when YouTube, like you were mentioning, like it was becoming big. And I remember like you just there were certain recordings that I just always gravitated towards on YouTube early on. And going back to you, there's one video. It was the Tchaikovsky from the final round of Queen Elizabeth. I was watching that in its entirety while I was at the gym a couple days ago, and I was like, wow, like there were so many things that you did in that piece that, I mean, I've heard that piece, you've heard that piece like 100,000 times, but there were things that you did that were so fresh and so nuanced, and it was new, but it made sense in its own unique way. So that's why I wanted to ask this question, is because you're such a interesting, unique musician in so many ways.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think I have a very keen eye for what I like. I don't know if I don't like something sometimes, but I know what I like.
Yeah.
So when I hear another artist do something that's really cool,
yeah.
I will steal it. I will steal it.
Yeah.
Sometimes what I worked on with my previous teachers was like, sometimes you gotta like filter the things that you don't like as well, because you only do things that you like, and suddenly you skip over details. But I'm very quick to have like, that was really cool, and I steal that, whether that's from anything from a certain fingering to a certain sound color, or to even the way they move on stage, or whether that's how they walk on stage, like really small little details. And maybe that comes from the artistic way of things. It's the same thing with even like certain rooms. For example, if there's a nice room that I like, I really like that shelf. I'm just very fast to see those things. So with Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, it's very interesting because it was one of the first pieces where I learned more or less on my own, I would say. I of course I learned it during school. So I learned it first with Pinchas Zuckerman when I was 17. It was one of the first concertos I ever learned with him, and it didn't really go anywhere. I mean, it was fantastic. Of course he's really great with technique, and I think we only did the first page. Okay, I left it. When I was 21, it was near the end of my time at Curtis. And I was asked to play Tchaikovsky Concerto. I was like, I'm just gonna learn it during the summertime, and I learned it. So at that time, it was one of the first projects where I'm gonna learn it its entirety and not show it to any teacher until I'm ready to play it. So in that way, I think that's also why I was looking at everything from a first-hand experience. So
well, and we talked before about this a little bit, and I'm curious to delve into it a little bit more, because we had this conversation about, should we keep pure to the score, or should we have our own fresh take? And I'm curious as to like where you kind of stand, because I mean, I don't think it shouldn't be like one spectrum or the other, right? It shouldn't just be like you're one or the other. Maybe you want to kind of compromise on both, but
I think it depends on the repertoire, first of all. If it's a Badini, L'Arrond de Lutin, or Dance of the Goblins, I think you go ham at it. If you want to play it 5 times as fast as usual, you want to play it slower. If you're going for a certain vibe, I think it's pretty legitimate, because it is a showpiece. If you're going for something like Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, something that is, even the composers themselves are very intentional in the way they wrote stuff. I think that there's definitely room for freedom to interpret those markings. But I do think that, especially for the audience of who you're sharing this with, it depends. Of course, if you want to just play as it is and do whatever, I mean, you can always do whatever you want. But for me, I think I like to have meaning behind everything. So whether that be the most weird interpretation, if there's a sense of, I look at the score in this way, and you can explain it, at the end of the day, I think, does the whole thing work? I think someone's got to be there to say that to you. So I've heard some pretty weird interpretations of all those things I just mentioned, the Bach sonatas and all that. Some people play extremely romantic. Some people play extremely Baroque. Some people play in between. I think they're all legitimate. The nice thing about these, about like some of the big pieces, Bach solo sonatas, let's just take that for example. It's such great music to begin with. The harmony speaks so much by itself already. So I think as long as you are able to somehow express the music through the harmonies, especially in those pieces, I'm pretty open-minded, at least right now. I'm pretty open-minded to see what how that can be interpreted. And I think there is merit to that because you know, every generation and every time frame is it does reflect in the way that we interpret music, just like language, right? So even though, let's say English, for example, English from 1,000 years ago was very different, but there's a reason for change, and we still revisit the past in order to understand the future. So as long as we're having that kind of mindset, I'm pretty okay with almost anything.
Well, and I think that's really, I'm glad you brought up Bach because him specifically, at least with the cello suites, and I think in the manuscripts for the violin sonatas and partitas too, there's almost no dynamic markings. There's no tempo markings, and you know, Bach obviously lived during a time where improvisation was a big thing, right? So he wanted, I believe, he wanted his performers, like performers that were playing his music, to have the freedom to listen and react to the harmonies that he was creating. And as long as there was conviction and as long as it made sense, I don't think he really cared necessarily what one thing you did. It was more about just reacting to the harmonies, like you said.
I think so. And that starts to really become even clearer when you start working with living day composers. Because my experience with working with most living day composers is, you know, they all have a spectrum as well of how much they really want things to be on the score. But many composers are like, you know what, that doesn't sound good at all, even though I was so specific with it. So let's just cut it out, right? And I think if you look back at Bach's time or Beethoven's time, you know, the players had a very different set of techniques. It's a different instrument. I mean, this is an instrument from the 1700s, but it's distorted to the way that's in the 21st century now. So even the sheer instrument itself, I think, has changed, and therefore the sheer root of playing a piece has to be interpreted a little bit differently as well. And how do we know what things sounded like? Are we trying to recreate what's been done, or are we trying to kind of put our own imprint? So of course, that's the beauty of art, because you can get into a day's worth of discussion about which one's right, and then you'll still not have a consensus at the end.
And I think with music, it's like, that's the beauty of it, is there's almost no right or wrong.
Exactly.
So unless you're playing wrong notes or
even then, sometimes, right?
That's fair. You can make that. There's a case for that. So moving forward, through your videos and through your teaching and through so much of your work already, you've inspired countless amounts of people.
Have I?
I would think so.
Okay.
I think so. I hope so.
Hope so.
And so I'm curious, how do you find inspiration externally that you can bring back to your own music? So, for example, what things or endeavors give you the joy and inspiration outside of music that you can bring back to your violin and to your musical life?
Oh, that's a deep question, Jin Young. I've had to discover that over the past couple of years. Yeah, I would say COVID actually kind of opened up that can for me. And I realized that I didn't want to continue the way that music was inspiring me beforehand, because, and I think we all go through this, we all kind of want what other people have done. And I think I was definitely in that zone as well. Because someone did, I got to do it too, right? Whether, is it something that I really want to do? And I think that's also part of growing up. And I'm looking forward to seeing where the next couple of years take me as well, because I do feel that music is a very powerful tool to anyone in this entire world, whether it's classical, pop, rock, you name it, right? There is meaning and purpose to music. So for me, what I've really tried to hold as inspiration is the power it has to completely change someone's view of life, especially. And it depends on how you program things as well. I mean, people go to concerts. Well, I'm talking about, let's start with concerts. I think concerts, first of all, if it's framed the right way and shared the right way, what's right Doesn't matter,
Yeah.
right? Let's say it.
Yeah.
It can really change someone's entire world.
Yeah.
I've experienced that myself. I've experienced other people. It is something about music, especially classical music. It's almost time slows down.
Yeah.
That 5 minutes, time expands.
Yeah.
And I think that in a society today where life kind of just rolls by, music is the one timekeeper where you can suddenly feel the fluidity of how things work, of how time moves.
Right.
So for me, what inspires me is the idea that because I've already done all of these things that are the competitions, the concerts and all that, I want to bring music to a different level.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? Honestly, I don't know yet, but that means projects, that means repertoire that I feel very deeply connected to. And of course, that's a luxury that I know that not everybody has the opportunity to do so. Right. But at the same time, I think that I've had enough credibility where I can actually start to explore that.
Yeah.
So for me, that gives me a lot of freedom, but also that's a whole different world to explore because now there's so many choices and it feels like there's so little time.
Yeah. Well, and that's really interesting because I think with classical music, it's such a niche art form. Right?
It is.
And even within the spectrum within the umbrella of music, classical music is its own entity because in almost no other genre of music do you go sit there in silence for an hour and a half, and really you have to be zoned in to really try and get what's happening, right? Yeah. And I love how you said time slows down or stops, because in other music maybe it might speed up, right? Like time speeds up, or it's so loud and it's so crazy. And with classical music, it's like you're sitting down in silence, and it's not to. I don't think that we sit in silence for a classical music concert because that's just how traditionally we've done it. Mm-hmm. I think it's something we do because we're honoring that music and we're giving reverence to it with our time and attention. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I think, like you said, it's so special in that way. It gives us the time to reflect in that short period.
I think classical music is not it's not a flashy art form by any means. So I understand, especially the bulk of classical music. There's some repertoire that is absolutely meant for that flash, but the bulk of the core of our repertoire is it's not something that I think most people can understand. Right. It's something, and I think the reason why we do fear sometimes about this older audience mentality is because I think that actually is our biggest demographic. Yeah. And it's because I mean, I don't want to sound like an old person, but at the same time, I think you need to have gone through decades of life. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not there, but I can understand to see how classical music actually makes sense to me more now. Yeah. But you need to go through kind of the weirdness of life and how abstract it is, and knowing that things don't make sense. Yeah. Right? And classical music doesn't always make sense in the sense from an outsider's perspective. Yeah. Right? If you go to a pop music show, and it's very expressive, of course. It's very, how do I say it? It's very raw in some ways because you're using words to describe something. Right. But I know that I look at my parents, when they look at classical music, it's changed for them too. Yeah. That the shapes and the sounds and the gestures and the dances and so forth, they explain something that is very personal to them in the past. Yeah. And I think that's when you can truly appreciate classical music and especially live performances, because if you do it too young, I think it's because you can't understand these abstract ideas yet. Yeah. So it's an art form that is definitely abstract. Yeah. I think we can do a better job of kind of portraying it in that way, but it's a journey. Yeah, it's a journey.
Well, and I think with that demographic, I think one could argue that before that point in life, it's hard to make time for classical music. So when you're at that stage in life, everything's hopefully a little bit more peaceful, and you're able to kind of actually sit down and do things like that. So I think there's something to be said about that demographic.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious, this kind of ties in really well with what I want to talk about next, because you've had the opportunity to see the classical music world from many different lenses, as a performer, as a teacher now, and even as a social media almost content creator. I don't want to put you in
Yeah,
that.
I'd say that.
Yeah,
no.
But you have quite a following on social media, and so you've been able to see firsthand, just even through your short accelerated career as a violinist, you've seen the evolution of classical music, and I'm curious how you think classical music is able to serve our modern society today, and what things we can do moving forward to continue to grow our art form to the masses.
That's a great question. Okay, so I see it from different lenses. So let's start with the performing aspect. I think any type of communal gathering is a very exciting thing for most people. I can't generalize, of course, but I think the majority of people, if they're invited to a concert and it's someone that's if it's a reason to go, I think beyond the concert experience, it's so human to be together. That part I find is so important, and I think that's why classical music became so questionable during COVID, because we couldn't get together. Half of, I think, the reason why we watch concerts is the idea of getting together, having a friend, seeing and inviting someone that you haven't seen in maybe a couple months, and be like, hey, there's a concert of this Vivaldi Four Seasons, and you and I both love it. Let's discover this new artist as well, and then have a good time, go get dinner or something. So that natural social environment is, I think, something we need to continue to share. I use this as an example because those things you need to remind yourself exist. I don't know about you, but for me, immediately after COVID, I actually forgot you could go to a theater and watch a movie.
I still forget.
I still forget too. So the first time I came up to that was I was in Europe, and I was so bored. I was so bored because I was like, I just landed here. I don't have rehearsal till tomorrow, but I kind of also don't want to practice because I'm kind of I had no more space for it. I was like, what is there to do? I'm like, what do people do? I don't want to go watch Netflix again. I watched everything in the catalog already, and then I don't want to go eat in a restaurant by myself. And I mean, just what else is I can't play sports. It's like 9 o'clock at night already. Then I just saw I walked to the cinema that's open at 10 p.m. They have a movie. So I went there by myself, and it was like 4 people, right? But then I remember the next day I asked one of my colleagues who plays in the orchestra. I said, "There's another movie. Do you guys want to go?" They're like, "Oh yeah, we can watch movies. We forgot about that, right?" And they're like, "Yeah, I had some plans, but after dinner we can go watch movies." So that idea, we have to remember that concerts are also a social event. No matter if you're in North America, Europe, Asia, South America, Africa, it's a very communal event. Second of all, with teaching, I think my lens of that is really to give the experience to the students that learning music is a very fundamental part of their training in their development as people. So I'm still working on understanding how to best share that. Of course, I'm sharing all of my techniques, but sometimes it's not only about that. It's much more about your experience with the instrument, your relationship with that, the idea of teamwork. And I think that's why musicians are also so good at doing other things, especially if they decide to go into another field, because the idea of giving and taking and adjusting to each other, the idea of abstract concepts and working consistently on an abstract idea and understanding how that overfolds in a couple of months later is so unique. From social media perspective, it's changing just like every other genre of
life, really.
It's becoming a very large role now. I think that before this entire explosion of like Instagram Reels and TikTok, I think social media was a little clearer to navigate. It was very much about we're going to use this now as our new platform to share the work that we're doing and hopefully get you to be interested in it as well. I think with the idea of influencers and the idea of just people doing trends, it is really hard to navigate. I'm not quite sure where it's going, quite honestly, but I think you can say that about almost every field, right? People are trusting influencers more than professionals. And I do see that as being a little bit of a worrisome situation. I do have trust still that hopefully parents can share with their kids that, there's two levels.
Yeah.
But it does scare me.
Yeah.
But I think what I've more recently in the last year or so, what I've done is a lot of cultural events on top of that. So actually a couple of weeks ago, I did a Canada-Korea gala event.
Okay.
And this was celebrating the 60th anniversary of Canada and the Republic of Korea having a peaceful relationship.
Oh.
And this was done in Ottawa.
Sure.
And I played a piece that was specifically arranged. I think it was called Ohenya. It's a traditional dance, but we made it into a Western style concerto. And it was played with traditional Korean instruments. But I was playing on the violin, and then it was a mixture of these two things. And the funny thing was, when that concert was advertised, it was sold within like half an hour.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I think people are thirsty for culture.
Yes.
People are thirsty for understanding each other, because with social media, it has allowed us to communicate even faster, but at the same time become more distant, because we can't. I think I've known many people, they don't trust what they're seeing. Yeah. So when something is in front of them, it's much more powerful. I was also in Abu Dhabi, where we did a collaboration. I worked with a lot of Arab violinists, and that was very interesting, just to share ideas as well in the flesh, not just online. So for me, that's definitely something that I see that the violin can do, at least with my experience. But we'll see.
Yeah. When I love what you brought up earlier about the music being a community experience, because I think there is a sector of classical musician or classical music lovers that are very traditional about things, and they almost kind of look down on behaviors that may not align with the traditions of going to a classical music concert. And I think at the end of the day, we're all hopefully going to concerts for the same reason. It's for the enjoyment and for the love and the respect of the music. And I think when all of us have that single, or when we share that single love for it in a very universal sense, then I think that makes going to concerts even more healthy and maybe more welcoming to the larger mass, maybe.
That's why, I mean, my biggest pet peeve is you got to really be smart with your programming.
Yes.
Because there are certain crowds that cannot handle certain repertoire, and there are certain repertoire that you do not want to play for a very specific crowd.
Yes.
So if you are asked to play an outdoor concert for families and kids, I mean, you got to be careful what you program. Program stuff that's fun to play. Program stuff that is meant to be more of an entertainment, and you're going to have a better time. They're going to react much more enthusiastically. If you're in an academic situation discovering about Schoenberg's last couple of works, play that, right? And be very specific and intentional with repertoire, because what I realized, and I hope other people realize, is that you don't have to only appeal as one type of artist. You have different shapes of how you present yourself as well. Is it over 1 month? Is it constantly shape-shifting? I don't know. But you even look at some pop artists, they show their more serious side, which is very authentic to them as well. They show their more commercial side, which is also very authentic to them. But what I don't like is kind of this pigeonhole that because you're this type of artist, that's the only type of music that you can play, and you have to be everybody needs to love it, right? Because that's slim pickings at this point for you. You're gonna appeal to one type of audience.
Exactly. It's all really fascinating. So I want to actually move forward to a new thing that I kind of came up with.
Let's do it.
It's called quarter note questions. It's like
what tempo?
60? Yeah. Well, and I specifically said quarter note and not 16th or 32nd because, again, it's kind of short and sweet, but I want to give you enough time to answer. These are just fun little personal questions about your interests and whatnot. So let's start. Favorite airport?
I like small airports. So I would say my Ottawa airport.
Ottawa? Okay.
Yeah, it's a nice airport.
Window or aisle seat?
Window.
Really? Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
First thing in the morning?
No, I wait 90 minutes.
Oh.
But yeah.
It's a good. Okay. Morning person or night owl?
Night owl.
Night owl. Go-to meal before a performance?
Actually, what do I eat?
Or is it nothing?
Nothing, actually.
Nothing?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, you like to
nothing.
keep it kind of, okay.
Yeah.
A go-to meal after performance.
Oh, anything.
Anything?
Anything. Just something to eat.
Okay,
I love eating
okay.
after concert.
Are you usually just like ready to just gorge?
Because I don't eat anything before.
Yeah,
I gotta eat something.
That's
Everything
fair,
tastes delicious.
Yeah,
Give me a piece
exactly.
of cardboard. It's delicious.
That's fair. One thing you never leave behind when you're on the road. And don't say phone, please.
Oh, actually, I wish I can leave my phone behind. I would say, yeah, of course, passport, but let's do something more creative.
Yeah.
Maybe my coffee maker. I have this AeroPress machine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you take that with you on the road?
I do.
Oh,
I
wow.
do.
Okay.
Yeah. This, I mean, it's just like a little plastic container thing.
Okay.
You can, like a French press.
Sure.
But I love to have a good cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like that much, but I
Right.
like a good cup. And espresso can be a little too thick for me sometimes.
Sure.
And then some coffees are too watered down. So I just like to have my own coffee. So a little bit of control.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you bring the coffee beans with you and everything?
Or sometimes I just go and get my own
sure,
local
sure.
coffee beans. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, this is why it's quarter note, right?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
have time.
We do, yes.
Yeah.
It's like a hell no. That.
Exactly. Nap or practice before concert?
Nap.
Nap?
Too late.
Too late.
Too late.
Yeah, there's no more work.
There's no more time.
iPad or sheet music?
I like sheet music.
Sheet music?
Yeah.
One composer you wish you could meet dead or alive?
I would like to meet Paganini.
Paganini.
Yeah. Actually, as a violinist,
Yeah.
that's one that I would really like to understand how he came up with all those incredible new techniques for the violin, and what kind of fingers did he actually have?
Yeah.
Because he's a violinist, and it's not very violinistic.
Yeah. Okay. Favorite Mozart concerto?
I like number 3, actually.
Number 3?
Yeah, that's my favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like
I played the 5th one the most.
Yeah.
But I like number 3.
Okay. And then Brahms or Tchaikovsky violin concerto?
Tchaikovsky to play.
Yeah.
I love listening to Brahms.
Uh-huh.
I don't feel confident playing Brahms yet.
Okay.
Maybe a couple years.
Yeah. Favorite Beethoven sonata?
Kreutzer.
Kreutzer. Number
9.
Or number 9, excuse me. Yeah. Okay. What was it? One piece you can play with 24 hours notice.
Ooh, there's a couple concertos I could do.
Yeah,
Concerto, Bruch First Violin Concerto, Korngold Concerto, Tchaikovsky, Sibelius, Mozart 5, and Mendelssohn.
Okay.
Yeah, I could play that.
Have you had that in recent years where someone literally called like?
Yes, I have actually.
Yeah.
Bruch Concerto. That was actually not. That was very recent. It was in
Okay.
Abu Dhabi. I was playing with the Royal Phil, and we had to switch programs.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I think maybe it was a little bit more than 24 hours, but it was like this, and it was
Okay, good. Least favorite composer?
Least favorite composer, and it's nothing to shame them. It's just I don't understand it. Is probably Schumann.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't understand his music.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's very hard for me to understand his music for some reason.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the piano quartet that I do like, and the quintet. That one is very easy. But the other piece I am playing is Romance right now, and I'm just not quite sure what to do with it.
Interesting.
But that's been his concertos, his other sonatas. I teach some of his Schumann sonatas to my students. I don't know what to do with it.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. One violinist you wish you could meet dead or alive?
That's already dead? Yeah. Oh, of course. I think Joachim.
Okay.
Yeah. Joseph Joachim.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Last one. Heifetz or Oistrakh?
Heifetz.
Yeah.
Well, Oistrakh, I would be honored to learn from either of them. But there's something about Heifetz because he was such a unique violinist. He did so many arrangements. I mean, so did Oistrakh. But there's something about Heifetz that because he was living in LA for a little bit, that it just feels a little bit closer to home.
That's fair.
And the fact that he was teaching full time as well at the University of Southern California, and to see that he, that's the thing about violinists that's you mentioned earlier about interpretation because he would just change stuff sometimes. Just to make it more violistic. I'm thinking about his Scottish Fantasy by Bruch.
Oh, yeah.
It's not really playable, a lot of it, but he did a lot of alterations that actually made it work. Yeah.
I'm curious. Okay, so this isn't pick one or the other, but can you talk a little bit about your
Yes!
violins and bows that you
Yeah,
have
I was
here?
waiting for you to talk about it. Okay, so where do we start? Okay, let's start with this like candy here. Okay, so this one is a Stradivarius.
Okay.
This is made in 1709.
Okay.
It's called the Engelmann Stradivarius. It is a beautiful instrument. It has such a caramel coating to it. First of all, you can see the varnish is really well done. I don't know how much of it is original, but I love the look of it. First of all, it's a huge instrument for Stradivari. If you look at it, it's pretty wide. It's pretty fat. I mean, maybe for violinists, for us, we can tell it's pretty fat.
Wow, it's like in such beautiful condition.
It is. It's an amazing condition. The sound, because as you can see, it's pretty flat as well. It has a huge sound for an old instrument. It has kind of this robust, throaty sound to it, which I think is so hard to get out of a violin. It projects beautifully. It can speak very fast. There's clear colors between the G, D, A, and E string. A real powerhouse. And it's one of my go-tos if I were playing a big concerto. Baroque pieces, somehow it works on this too. This is also a very beautiful instrument. This is a Guarneri del Gesù, nicknamed the Titan. So I should make it clear. The Stradivarius is on loan to me from the Nippon Foundation in Japan. It's a long-term loan that I've acquired since 2022. This instrument is on loan to me by the Canimex Foundation, which is based out of Drummondville, Quebec in Canada, and also have been given a loan to use this instrument. It's a beautiful one. It's made in 1741. As you can see, the varnish is completely different. It's very chocolate, like, more brittle. It's a little smaller, actually. It's pretty slim, and you can see it's not very fat. The thing about this instrument is it's very, very, very nuanced. It has a beautiful texture to it. It's much more silky than this one. This one I would call it more tiger-like. This one is much more, it has much more finesse. It doesn't do well in big concert halls, but it does amazing in recordings. This one's the opposite. For recordings, it can sound a little bit one-dimensional, but on stage, for some reason, because of the textures and colors and the louder sound, it just shows so much more. But this one, for some reason, because the arch is much higher as well, naturally that doesn't allow so much of a sound production. But you can do so much more with the colors as well. So I'm very lucky to have both. The bows, I have a couple bows, but quite frankly, I keep using this bow, and I know it's weird to do this, but I've had this since I was about 13 years old. And even though I've tried out some really, really fantastic bows, I have some on loan to me, I still go back to this one. I don't know, something about my technique really developed with this bow, and I just, I can't really change. Same thing with this one.
Is this a modern bow?
It's a modern bow. It was made in 2005. By a guy of Charles Dubois, French-Canadian. And this bow is a modern bow as well that I acquired when I was around 16. It's a very good bow too, but I also, similarly to this one, I keep going back to this because it's such a beautiful bow. This is my main bow, actually, I would say. It's made by a guy who lives actually in my hometown. His name is Michael Van, and I really like it. It just, I switch between the two. This is definitely much more for the big concertos, and this is kind of a nice all-purpose one. So, that's my instruments.
I'm curious, so with the Strad, you said that you prefer that for the concert halls. That, along with the projection, do you think just the colors come out more in the overtones because it projects so well, that it's better for the bigger halls?
I think with big concert halls, the biggest challenge for me is when you're having like a symphonic concert, you really have to have an instrument that cuts through. And this has the ability of cutting through, but still having a very strong sense of depth. Because what often you get is a very loud instrument, but it sounds very one-dimensional. But something about this, because of the texture and the way it's been set up, and just I think a little bit of the history of this instrument, is that you're able to hear a lot of depth with a lot of power as well. This actually I think has more depth than this instrument, but it doesn't really project in a 2,000 seat concert hall. It does really well at 500 seats or less. But and the problem is, if you start to force this instrument for a 2,000 seat hall, then it becomes one-dimensional as well. Whereas this one, if you play too soft, it doesn't have any dimensions. So
interesting. So would you say you prefer the Strad for like you said, the big concertos, and then for the Guarneri, maybe like chamber music settings?
Yes, absolutely. I love this Del Gesù for like chamber ensembles. I was playing that recently for a chamber music concert, and then this one's really good. It really does have a strong, I mean, I love both, honestly. It depends on the hall, I would say. You can make either one work. But I'm talking from a point of luxury, of course, right? Just 20 million on the table here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I'm guessing you don't bring both everywhere, right? Or
Have I ever brought both?
For like a concert? Or...
No.
Okay.
I've never brought both.
Okay.
But I'd be curious one day to do a concert comparing the two. So maybe I'll do that one day.
Yeah, because I mean, one concert, like over a 3-day weekend of concerts, you can do one night.
Yeah, I don't like doing that because this instrument's bigger than this one. So if I go from here, I'll start missing everything. And if I go from this and this, everything sounds flat.
Yeah.
I do have a modern instrument as well, which is my own. So these I don't own any of these. But I have one that I own. It's a Kurt Weidenhaus made in 2022. It's a modern instrument, and that instrument is very interesting. So as I mentioned, this is really good for big concert halls, but it has to be like good concert halls, right? Wood and nice seating and acoustically sound for instruments. This really good for acoustically sound like churches, seminar halls, and intimate settings.
Sure.
The modern instrument actually really shines in very difficult circumstances. If it's like a black theater, or if it's a carpeted room, or if it's a huge stadium that has no reverberation, the modern instrument does the best. Because it has that strength of being extremely laser-like with sound. It's a brand new instrument, so everything's very like crispy. And the sound, I mean, truly, it has the biggest sound of all because of the pure technology of it. We know what works and what doesn't. So those are kind of like the rosters of instruments that I use, and I do choose based on repertoire. Like if I'm going to a small concert church hall, I'll probably bring the Daljezu. If I'm playing, as I will be with the Toronto Symphony in a couple of months, it's a big, beautiful concert hall, I will bring the Strad. And if I go to like a smaller regional orchestra that has not the best acoustic, I will probably bring the modern instrument because I ultimately want the, not just for me, but I want the audience to have the best sonic experience. I've done the opposite before, where I brought the modern instrument to a really small concert hall. It was like too brash, and then the Strad to a black box theater, and it just like this. And then this went to a big concert hall, and people like can't hear you.
Oh, interesting. Well, and just quickly going back to your bows, that's interesting. You play on 2 modern bows because, I mean, of course, people talk about like the wave of like great modern violin makers, but equally so, I think right now there's a huge wave of great modern bow makers, and you're seeing a lot more people, both solo artists and others, that are choosing to play modern bows as opposed to the old French bows. So that's really interesting.
I think so. I think modern bows for me are just more all-purpose. Yeah, and French bows I think are very specific to repertoire. You can only have 4 in a violin case, so and they always need to be reheard. So I don't know. I do like some old bows as well, but they're so specific to repertoire.
Well, this has been so fascinating and so enlightening, and I'm just so happy to have had the privilege of talking with you today.
Thank you, Shenyang.
Before we close, can you share with us and the audience any lasting words of wisdom, especially the younger audience members that might be listening, that are trying to cultivate their own unique path in the world of classical music as you've done so?
I think that's a really good question, especially for younger musicians. I think that we're in a world right now where we see what people have and what we don't have. And it's very easy to think that what other people have is the right thing, or the thing that everybody else should have. Like what you should have is because this person did X competition, I need to do that competition too, right? That's fine, I think, at a certain beginning stage, but especially when you start to enter college, it's really important to at least start to discover that what you see is not the only path that you have to take. You can create your own path. And I highly encourage people to do that. Take experiences from other people that have done things that you actually truly want to do. So let's say there's one artist that you really, really love doing, you just really respect, right? And you're like, I want to get this part of their life that I really look forward to. Then you kind of research what have they done and how can I mimic that a little bit. But what I would really avoid is the pure pressure of being, everybody else is doing this competition. Everybody else is getting this recording. Everybody else is going to this school. And feeling that if you're not doing the same thing, you're FOMO, your fear of missing out. And I think that's bad because And I mentioned, because we're living in a world that is so blatant with that kind of content, especially on social media. Everybody's going on vacation. Everybody's, on luxury travel. Everybody is, just going to eat out every day. It's so easy to feel that you're missing out. And that's exactly the same thing with music. Music and classical music, but honestly, even like generally, most lives are not that glamorous. Right? You do have to put in the work. You have to be creative. What you see on the internet and social media is a glimpse of a very specific curated time of their life.
Exactly.
And just understand that most people have to go through mundane tasks every day. And there's always going to be someone that's living a better life and someone that's always living a worse life than you. And your perspective has to continuously change who you're talking to. If you're talking to someone, they might have a life that looks glamorous, but of course they're coming from a different perspective. So my suggestion is try to discover what you want to do, or maybe what you don't want to do at least, and then just be open-minded that not everything has to come to you so quickly. Most things come pretty slow. No rush.
That's beautiful advice. Seriously, Well, Timmy, this has been such a pleasure, and we wish you nothing but just continued joy and love for music as you move forward in your thriving career. So,
appreciate it. Thanks, Shin Young.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks for coming.